My name is Darren Hupke, and this is Pixels and Polygons. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode. This episode is a fun episode. I'm just starting this off the top of my head and not having a script or anything. I never do. I know, you can probably tell. But I have a returning guest. Aidan Moher is on the show again. He is the writer of Fight Magic Item. He's done a lot of online features. He's working on a couple new projects as well. We kind of chat about. Always fun chatting with him. He is obviously a lifelong and a dedicated gamer with a history of it. So being able to talk to people like this is why I do the show. So the guests that I've had on, I've been lucky to have some great conversations with them. So listen to the episode and enjoy it. We have a conversation around favorite game character. What is it that we like about them and kind of what drew us to them, and then just kind of a story and conversation around the game itself. So I won't spoil who it is until the episode starts, but yeah, that's that. I rebounding back from the Beat 'em Up Volume 1 pause situation I talked about last week. That Kickstarter was canceled. I am going to revisit and figure out how to potentially move forward with that. No news on that. But because of that, I bumped up my production schedule, my publishing schedule. I knew I was going to be doing some new issues of the Retro Game Zine. Obviously, that's going to be a monthly thing I'm doing, but I just slotted that in sooner. So in the time from last episode to now, I actually have a Kickstarter going for issue 3 and 4 of that. Issue 3 is all focused on Final Fantasy XI online, and 4 is on Project Firestart. That's what it is. Gosh, I don't know why I blanked on that. Well, I blanked on that because I never played it before, and it was recommended from a guest contributor on Blue Sky in the retro gaming circles I've been kind of interacting with and following. I found someone who proposed the idea of wanting to do this and contribute, and so we're working together. You can follow them, Sasha's Retro Bites, on Blue Sky. I'll have kind of their tag and all that stuff that you can see on the Kickstarter page. On issue 3 is going to have a few contributors. Another online persona is 6th Gen Bliss, who is just kind of shares a lot of great, cool retro gaming content. Plus, a former EGM and OneUp.com editor-in-chief, as well as GMR magazine. A long history with the Ziff Davis stuff. But the Milkman himself is actually going to be contributing an article. So, to the Final Fantasy XI issue, which is super rad. As a kid growing up and just obsessing over and loving EGM, me and my friends grew up reading those magazines religiously, seeing the My Life and Vanity L articles show up is what really got me super hyped and excited to play Final Fantasy XI myself one day. And it was just a cool feature to see continuous coverage like that over the months and kind of earlier pre-internet years for myself. So huge get to connect and collaborate and be able to have an article from him in the book. So anyway, a lot on the Kickstarter. It's on the page itself. You can read all about it there. Otherwise, I'm also in the production planning or pre-production and planning stages for 32-Bit Library Volume 5, which of course has moved up in my publishing plans because of the beat 'em up stuff. So anyway, you can follow along and see all this stuff and read all about what I'm doing on Blue Sky, on my Patreon at patreon.com/Darren Hupke. Get all the digital books, Retro Game Zine Issue 1, and the other digital books on pixelsandpolygons.net. Pre-orders for the 32-Bit Library Volume 4 Deluxe Edition just went up, so if you missed the Kickstarter, you can get some of the remaining stock I have of that and pre-order that now. gosh, I think that's everything. So, yeah, enjoy the episode. We've got Aidan this week, and next week we'll have another new guest as well. So, we'll mixing things up with some cool returning collaborators and also some new voices. So, thanks a lot for listening, and we will see you again next week. Bye. Well, let's do it. Let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of Pixels and Polygons. I almost mispronounced that, and I've never done that before. Pixels and Polygons. I have a returning guest, Aidan Moher's here, writer of Fight Magic Item and a bunch of other great stuff. You can find links to all of his stuff below in the show notes. I did that in the last episode as well. But welcome back, Aidan. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me back. Love talking about video games.
Yeah, I feel like now more than ever, it's a good time to talk about video games. Maybe take your mind off things and whatnot. Just have some self-time, self-care time to just enjoy and relax and find the good things that are going on in life.
It's vital. Like when the news is full of what it's full of, it is essential to find your peace in the world as well, where you can.
Yeah. So it's been a few weeks, few months since we kind of last chatted and everything. Maybe you want to give us a little bit of update, what you've been doing in your world, like any new projects or any new articles or things that you're proud of that are coming out soon, or maybe that you want to share?
Yeah. I've been working hard at work on my next book and breaking ground on what might be coming after that, which is exciting. So books 2 and 3, which means I have not been doing a lot of the work elsewhere. And so it's been a little quiet online, but at the end of the year, end of 2024, I should say, I put out a couple of features about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and was really happy with those. One of them was it was for Games Radar. It was a look at how Final Fantasy as a series sort of lost its way when it decided it needed to be something brand new every iteration, and how that wasn't really true for the first 9 or 10 games in the mainline series. And it was sometime around Final Fantasy X when Sakaguchi left the company, and it turned into this series that was, started to lose its identity. And I think that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth could create a great framework for what Final Fantasy could build around for its future entries, where it becomes more iterative and exploratory through iteration rather than a complete reinvention. So I was pretty happy with that. That was something I've been thinking about a lot, all the way back to sort of the first remake game. But it really came together with Rebirth, because I think Rebirth is fantastic and does a lot of great things that have felt like the most engaging, interesting representation of what Final Fantasy can be in a long, long time.
I need to give that a read. I didn't read that actually. I've always thought about that too, and I guess it's just the way development has been, and how Final Fantasy, especially once it hit 13, and like that fractured development of what that became with its Fabulous Nova Crystallis, whatever, that whole thing that it was gonna be, that just never became, and really it set them back for quite a while, it seemed, with what they were really doing. But 1, 2, and 3 felt like they were introducing us to this series and this concepts and things like that. And then 4, 5, and 6 had all this 16-bit narrative driven, really just upping the quality and an expectation, but they were all iterating essentially on the same foundation for themselves. And then 7, 8, 9 took those concepts, but with pre-rendered backgrounds and advancements in technology, but essentially mechanics and gameplay and things you're so familiar with from previously playing in the series. But yeah, like you said, after 10, development teams, sizes, timing, technology, whatever it may be, a combination of every single one of those things, it definitely impacted how we received those games, and every one was a new engine, new team, new focus, new development, new gameplay mechanics and hooks, and trying to step outside of its own foundation and boundaries to make sure it was something fresh, when it always still was fresh, but it was just a different version of what it was. And yeah, it did become something new. So yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to have to give that a read. I'll find that link specifically as well for that article and put that in the show notes, so we all can read that.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, I'm looking forward to the new books as well. Working on books is fun. Unless you get a letter from somebody that says maybe IP and copyright are in question.
Oh no,
You got to ask some things, and
yeah.
maybe a little sore still, maybe a little open wound. I guess I'm peeling, picking at myself there, but yeah,
That one's hard to heal from for sure. That's a rough break. Sorry that happened.
who needs months of work to just be put on the shelf somewhere, and who knows
Yeah.
what's going to happen with? But we'll
Isn't
figure it
that
out.
the most video game industry thing that can happen to somebody though? Working on something for months and then one day, one decision, somebody says no,
Yeah.
got to throw it out.
Gosh,
No
I can't
good.
believe how brutal that's got to feel for somebody in like a years long development cycle, and then something like that happens. Like, gosh, that's got to be crazy. But cool. Well, then let's get going into an icebreaker. I'm toying with the idea of asking a this or that question with the icebreakers as well. So let's just jump into this. Yeah, you tell me, turn based or real time.
Oh,
This or
turn
that. Pick
based.
one.
Turn based. Yeah. I mean, I have no problems with real time combat. And it's funny because we were just talking about Final Fantasy and how it's sort of shifted to real time combat. But turn based is always like, I just like the sort of tactical, slower pace of turn based combat, even with something like ATB, which is not, if you have it on active, like you're having to make quick decisions and stuff. It's not, like a game of chess where you could sit on a decision for a long time. But I mean, even chess has a clock. But there's something about turn-based, and I guess it's just me being 41 and growing up with that, but that's kind of my jam. I've been playing Vagrant Story and Parasite Eve recently. So I beat Vagrant Story, I went into Parasite Eve, and they both use like this weird blending of real-time combat with turn-based sort of actions that I think is really interesting. It's showing sort of that evolution towards something like turn-based or real-time combat in Final Fantasy games or in RPGs. But under the hood, especially Vagrant Story, like Vagrant Story is still just a turn-based RPG because everything sort of happens on a turn clock and you kind of approach it when you start approaching combat in that game from the perspective like, oh, this is like a strategy RPG with real-time elements and I'm just controlling one person. And you recognize that, you kind of have to treat it differently than what you might expect from something like Metal Gear Solid. Everything starts to click a little bit more. And I just love that design space of like, late 90s blending of different genres and gameplay systems in a way that isn't fully, doesn't fully commit to real-time combat the way Final Fantasy 15 or 16 did. But it didn't really go anywhere afterwards outside of Vagrant Story and Parasite Eve, but the way that they wanted to take what was popular at the time, what was working at the time, sort of bring that forward into a different genre without losing the appeal of turn-based is really, I find it really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's been fun to go back to.
Yeah, I think I'm the same vibe. I think I'd much rather pick the turn-based over real-time, but in those, like we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, but the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, I do like the idea that it's like an evolution of the ATB system because like you can kind of like pause a little bit to like think, though most of the time you can just kind of quickly like action combat through it. But some of those like difficult battles are like real trials. I like.
I love that combat system in the remake trilogy or the remake series. I think it's such a perfect blend of real time action with turn-based decision making, but it's also sort of has real time with pause. Like that's the combat system like Baldur's Gate or Pillars of Eternity that I kind of, whenever I'm playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I go back to. I'm like, this is real time with pause, sort of built around a turn order, an ATB system, which I find really interesting. I don't like real time with pause on PC RPGs. But for whatever reason, it really clicks and works for me in Rebirth as just like taking some of the best elements of all of those different types of combat systems and blending them into something that like not just works, but like works far better than maybe it has, any right to work considering its complexity.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see, and again, going back to what I was saying earlier, I'd love to see that as a foundation of like the Final Fantasy combat system and then build on top of that. Like the way that ATB was the combat system for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Let's work with what we got in Rebirth and continue to improve that and then get creative and add personality through subsystems or character building or the way you kind of interact with the party that you're building, job systems, materia, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Keep the stuff that works. Keep the really good stuff and then start iterating and give personality in different ways rather than going from, 12 to 13 to 15 to 16, which all have like vastly different combat systems.
Yeah. Yeah, not to get too into the game development side of things, but like if they still took that foundation, like you're suggesting, like you have like an engine, you have like this underlying formula in place already.
Yeah.
The time during development can just be spent on obviously like making or modifying like assets you have, writing and designing like the scenarios or those extracurricular like systems and mechanics that are in play. And when so much of development in the way they've been doing that is like, cool, we've got to spend a year plus on like technology and engine and all this stuff before we even start to implement these other things we're thinking about. And then once we get to this point, maybe we start throwing half of that out the window and we get Final Fantasy 15 because it was a 13 spinoff instead at one point. And like, yeah, it's just, you can do it in a way that's sane for like shareholders to put out a game and make it efficient and everything, but also same for the people and creative process of it all too. And with less time, like, there's a whole system to it, people can
like,
do it.
And I understand like the scope of games and AAA games in particular has blown up and we'll never go back to what it was in the 90s. But like Final Fantasy 7 came out in 1997. Final Fantasy 10 came out in 2000, I think, or maybe early 2001. I can't remember, but it was like three and a half years between Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 10, which is just like bananas, right? Like we go longer than that between single iterations in the series at this point. And I think we could find a middle ground. And, I've spoken with the Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth team, and they've talked about how like reusing assets, but also specifically like keeping a team together that understands the game, understands the fundamental game design of that trilogy, allowed them to make Rebirth far faster than they could have if they were sort of starting from scratch the way that you're describing. And I think we could, as an industry, we could learn a lot from the success that Rebirth has had and how they managed to succeed in that way.
I haven't even thought about that side of things. Like obviously, like, in my own creative processes and writing and putting together like the books that I've been doing, I've been using InDesign and like self-learning and doing that myself. I can do it so much quicker and faster now. I have such an understanding, especially having the same like idea of like, oh, cool. Like I learned how to do this. I learned not to mess up this size. I learned how this like impacts things. Like I can put one of these things together so much faster than I did my first or second one. Like same thing for the teams. I mean, more of a reason to like think about how they're investing in buying out these studios. They have them put out a game. Maybe it's not as big of a sales, maker as they thought. Like if you just continue to invest in these people and this talent to let them make another game with the same group of people together who have a synergy to understand how to turn something around, your investment could have another game out probably sooner to help you earn this money that ultimately you want to do, but also allow these people to continue to stay creative and stay working on things, even if it's not quite the same sales maker that it was, man, that's crazy. I didn't think about so much big business and creative sidewise on it. I'm just thinking from the core developmental concepts of it, but it all plays.
Jason Schreier's latest book, Play Nice, looks at the history of Blizzard and how it started as this like really like, tight, passionate group of people who are consistent across games, creating these, many classic games, right? Like every game they were putting out, Warcraft, StarCraft, Diablo, like just hit after hit. And how and why it was so important that it was like this group of experienced teammates creating these games, and why that worked so well, and why it all started to unravel once they got bought up, once they got, acquired, rolled into places like Activision and stuff, and why that capitalistic side of the industry just sort of tears apart the cohesion that you're talking about, and what is it called? Like where institutional wisdom, right? And institutional experience. And when you're breaking up teams or you're acquiring companies and then just folding them into your current catalog and then, distributing those people across your existing organization, it just doesn't work, right? Like there's so much value in what exists between those specific people. And today we just saw news that like BioWare has basically been broken up into like a shell that like there's a small number of people, I think, still working on pre-production for Mass Effect 5, but basically after Veilguard, I think, failed to hit sales goals or whatever, or didn't set the world on fire the way they wanted it to, BioWare's sort of been just distributed throughout the rest of the parent company, and you just wonder if you'll ever be able to get that back, right?
Yeah.
They're basically starting over from scratch at this point.
Yeah.
Stuff.
And like the people in the environment that made the magic of those things, like it's not the name of the company just because you're trying to prop that up. It's like,
it's the people.
You're not going to necessarily recreate that in the same way.
Exactly. That's right.
Crazy. Well, good chat. All right. That was this or that. That was one this or that question. And thank you so much. I will ask you a silly icebreaker, then we'll get right into the episode. But if you had to compete in a fighting game tournament, like from a fighting game franchise of your choice, which one would it be?
Oh gosh,
then I have a follow up after that, but
it would be a bloodbath no matter what I pick. So I'd better pick something like Smash, because there's like pretty ordinary people in Smash Bros. Like Mario's a plumber, so maybe I'd stand a chance. There's a lot of like random luck in Smash. That's the only thing I could rely on. Just how much random luck comes into any sort of match. Because if it was any sort of I mean, like, not to sell Smash short, because like it's fantastic, but if I went into any sort of like highly technical fighting tournament, I'd be toast.
No, think about it from if you actually had to actually be in this world.
Oh yeah, no, I'm talking like if Aidan was trying to fight against like Blanca or whatever, or Ryu or Ken, or not Ken, what Dan? Like I'd probably lose against Dan. Maybe it would be like, a nail biter for a few minutes against Dan, but like, real life Aidan would go pretty fast. But I think in Smash, I'd use my in-game tactics. I'd just run around trying to avoid any sort of conflict until one of my opponents is at like 280%, and like maybe I get lucky and smash them out of there just with my baseball bat or whatever. So I got to go Smash. Because like you can kick
an electric mouse type rat that's running around, sure.
Exactly. Maybe I find like a Pokeball and get some Charizard action in there and stuff or whatever. And because otherwise, it's not looking good. I got to get lucky with some special items.
Okay, then. So knowing that Smash, you're in it, you're competing in it. Where would your stage location be?
Oh man. Oh, that's a good question.
This is going to be you. It doesn't have to be a video game necessarily, but what is an exaggerated video gamey location for you that we would fight?
Yeah, man, it would be like a sweet library, I think. Like lots of books, but think like the library from like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, where like, the big ghost books are coming off the shelves and stuff. So they'd like, they could create platforms, or they could change the way that the level layout, exists over the course of the fight or something. A library would be pretty cool. Magic library.
Okay. I like that. That's cool. Thank you for participating.
Of course.
All right. So here it is, the main question then for the episode. You picked two. We're going to record the second after this, but people aren't going to know that, but now they know that, and I always do this. But the first one we want to chat about is, who is one of your favorite gaming characters? Not just your favorite, but, what is one of your favorite gaming characters, and what do you love about them?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this because I have a lot of really, dear video game characters. One of my very first that I like really fell in love with was Shala from Chrono Trigger. I love Vivi from Final Fantasy IX. But when it came down to it, like when I think about like who's my favorite video game character, it always comes back to Max Caulfield from Life is Strange. And that's not just, I think, because I recently finished the second one, Double Exposure. But there was something about discovering Life is Strange several years ago, and Max just being such a unique, interesting take on a protagonist in a video game that I just really kind of imprinted on in a weird way as like a 35-year-old dude playing a game about a 18-year-old high school student. But she just seemed to like thread that needle between like sort of like quiet and like introspective and like reserved, like an introvert. Like you don't get a lot of introverts in video games, right? You get extroverts who are out there like putting their agency out into the world, right? They're impacting the world. They're taking up space. And Max Caulfield just isn't that. She's introverted and she's kind of nerdy, but not in like a trying too hard way. And when they were writing her, they just kind of nailed that archetype, that in a way that kind of went beyond any sort of archetypes. It blended things together in a way that felt like a real natural person. She contrasts Chloe, her best friend, the other sort of main character in the game, so well. Chloe's very extroverted, very, you know, like she's kind of like punk rock, like in your face, very aggressive in the way that she, like, you know, goes out into the world, whereas Max is sitting back, observing, watching people, thinking about things, thinking a lot, which I, you know, related to. And I just had never seen a character in a video game like that before. And so she's always stuck with me over the years. And just whenever I need some comfort, Life is Strange is always there, even though the subject matter can be a little, you know, it can be a little dark sometimes, but it also has so much brightness and creates this world that Max feels like she lives in, because people in the world exist, you know, on their own, but also have strong relationships with her that help define and help the player understand who she is and why she is the way she is and stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I mean, do you feel like you see a little of yourself in the character? Is that why you kind of like attach or enjoy the character? And then also I was going to kind of see, like, what are your thoughts around, like, is it stand out to you because she is like unique and not common? But you kind of answer both those questions. But yeah, I mean, obviously I think it really makes something like stand out more when it is something new or something fresh, like seeing a character, hearing a voice that isn't quite you know, familiar because it doesn't get used as often, or isn't the traditional like standard like character type and everything. I think that is definitely a refreshing way to present a story and everything, and an easy way to get somebody's attention and everything too. So I've heard nothing but good things about that series. I did purchase them back on like the PS3 or 4, like on some kind of sale, and I'm like, oh great, I'm gonna play all these. And I think I played like the first episode of the first game, and I was like, yeah, this is rad, I'm gonna come back to this. And I just never booted it back up. And I've like, it's always one of those ones that I'm like, I should just have it downloaded and ready on standby, and I'll play it soon, and it just keeps getting bumped down my list.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a million of those games for sure. And that's what Life is Strange was for me for a few years. And then I don't even remember what it was that finally pushed me into playing it. But I did. And it was just like, you have this opening scene that's sort of dramatic with the storm. But then Max sort of wakes up from a dream, and she's just in photography class. And she's sort of like, you know, not really paying attention to what's going on. She's a little spacey, like inattentive, gets called out by her teacher, you know, for not listening. And then, you know, she kind of goes through those motions, tries to get out of doing some schoolwork, which is just like totally what I was like in high school. Like I was trying to dodge, you know, any sort of extra work that I could do. I was very inattentive. Not, you know, like, well, still doing well enough in high school. And then she hits the halls and puts her music on, you know, and there's just all these like interesting attributes to her, and like, you know, how the way that she uses headphones and music to avoid the, you know, the loud bustle of the hall, or avoid maybe having to like socially engage with people. You just don't see that sort of thing in video games a lot. And it can be a hard character to write as well, I think, because it doesn't rely, you know, it's not that she's a passive character, but she's so sort of introverted and like drawn into her own thoughts and her own world, that you have to sort of build the story around the idea that like, okay, she's going to be a little harder to draw into situations than, you know, whoever, Dante or Kratos or whatever. Like, you know, Kratos is another introverted character, but he is obviously like, you know, the way that he imposes his will on the world around him is very obvious, whereas Max has to be sort of drawn into that through sort of emotional conflict in a lot of interesting ways.
Yeah. So I had an additional question in this too, is, you know, what would they do in a potential sequel? But so in this case, there has been sequels to Life is Strange and everything. But I guess, you know, without having to feel like spoiling or retreading on some of those thoughts, like, do you feel like Max as a character has like had like a very thorough and like complete story arc? Like, are you satisfied if there was, you know, if this was it, is this enough for like this character, or would you like there to be creatively written ways to bring this character back and have more games just to kind of continue to be a part of it?
It's a good question. And let's follow up as part of the reason I also wanted to talk about Max, because she did just have a sequel, right? Like there was Life is Strange 1, and almost almost 10 years, I think, passed between the two Max Caulfield games. And at the end of Life is Strange, I felt like there was a complete story there. I didn't think Max was like screaming to tell more of her story. But at the same time, she was somebody that I wanted to spend more time with. There is, like, Life is Strange does have this incredibly divisive ending, with a lot of character input, and, you know, people feel really strongly about like this choice or that choice, which would widely and dramatically change what comes next for Max. And so when the sequel came out, I was really curious about that, because, you know, how do they integrate choices that the player has made that impact who Max has become? And I really ended up liking Double Exposure, the second game, more, I think, than a lot of other people did. And I think there were a lot of people, and, you know, depending on the choice you make at the end of the first Life is Strange, I think Double Exposure works better than if you made the other choice. So there's a binary choice. I think if you make choice A, it works a lot better, Double Exposure, than if you made choice B. I'm a ride or die choice A person, and so it worked really well for me. I felt like the story was very natural because they took Max and she grew up, and just the same way we all grew up. And so she was, you know, 18 in the first game, then she's 28 in the second game, and she doesn't just feel like 18-year-old Max. She feels like 28-year-old Max who has gone through 10 years of adulthood, and changed because of that. And she is still introverted and nerdy, but she's also learned to be a little more, you know, social and comfortable in her own, you know, in her own skin, in a way that I think is really believable for somebody who's as smart and empathetic as Max is. And then what they smartly did is they went and looked at Life is Strange, and they didn't just put Max in another adventure, but they said, how would that first story have changed Max? What would happen over the last 10 years? And so Double Exposure is very much about Max and the way that she dealt or didn't deal with the trauma of what happened at the end of Life is Strange 1, and how that has impacted her and changed her and created new conflict for her 10 years later. And I just thought that that was a really fascinating way to return to a character, is not try to replicate the first game, you know, the themes of the first game, but look at what the first game was and how it would change her and what that would mean for an adult version of the same character. Then you get to the end of Double Exposure, and, like, you know, to kind of answer the game kind of answers your question, because it does set up a story or a plot development that will open the door for more Max Caulfield games, which I'm excited about because I really like Max Caulfield. I'm not entirely thrilled with the way that they did that and opened up the opportunity for more of those games, but I also trust that, you know, as a character, she has a lot of depth and a lot of story left to tell, and a lot of room to tell more stories and continue to grow. Because she's pretty broken. She's like, at the beginning of the game, she seems like she's got like her stuff together. By the end of the game, you're like, oh, actually, she's still like totally broken and has so much work that she needs to do. And this is only the beginning of sort of her ability to overcome the trauma that she's been hiding from for a decade. And so, you know, I think they worked really well in Double Exposure, and I think the gap between the games helped, and I think the fact that they smartly aged her up so that she could show a different side of who she was. We see her at a different stage of her life. Worked really well for that.
Yeah, that's cool. I really need to try those out. I mean, I do love a good like narrative. I do love a good like game where you have to like balance those choices, and it's not just like, you know, save this person or like, you know, be a renegade and like, you know, kill all the children. You know, it's like you're just making like, you know, tough choices and, you know, real world and grounded choices, you know, through like a scenario like that. I'd be curious to know more, you know, just about like a potential like, you know, sequel idea. I'm a type of person who, like, if I read like a good like comic or I read a good story or something like that, you know, and it's one and done, and it's like, and it's great. Like, I love that can exist forever and be great. But I'm also good with like some other, you know, creative idea coming in to like maybe like shoehorn in a potential like sequel idea and give you an excuse to just have more time with this character. Yeah. Even if it just feels like forced and bad. Like, if you're going to give me a chance to like like be more in this world, even if it, at the risk of the original story being contradicted potentially. Like,
Yeah.
I think I'm okay with that. Like, as a kid, my best friend and I, we read the Hatchet books by Gary Paulson. Just loved Hatchet. Hatchet was great. But then there's a sequel, to it, and then they did another one. The guy. He did a sequel called Brian's Winter, where it was like, what if he wasn't rescued at the end of the first one? And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'll go back there, and I'll buy along, I'll play along. Like this, you can take them all independently and enjoy them all, and even if it's forced, still enjoy it. But I mean, I don't know that you want to necessarily like sell it out and just constantly retread and like just use this character just for the sake of doing it. But if you have a creative or inventive story to tell, like I'm good with them bringing characters back, in a property I enjoy.
Yeah. And I think you need to do it smartly. Like one of the things I like about Double Exposure is they sort of invert Max's responsibilities or role compared to the first game. And I don't want to go too far into spoilers about like how they do that, but she's able to take what she's learned over time and apply that and try to help other people not make the same mistakes that she did. And I think that's interesting, right? Like you need some sort of reason to return to the story. Otherwise it becomes an instance of like, oh, this is, this feels like the same story. Or it's like, why does this one person keep having all of these, adventures or traumatic experiences, or like, how many adventures can one person really have in their life? Right. And that can also be sort of something that can turn me away from ongoing like serialized stories about characters if they're not feeding into like a larger plot. And I mean, Life is Strange tried to avoid that for a long time, and they did, right? Like every Life is Strange game had a new setting, had new characters. There wasn't really a lot of crossover, little tiny bit of crossover with like secondary characters who might sort of like peep up here and there. But otherwise, like, Life is Strange 2, new characters, like new cast, new superpowers, new setting, new structure to like sort of what their story was. True Colors, same thing, new setting, new characters, new powers. And it wasn't until we got to Double Exposure that they were finally like, okay, like everybody loves Max, let's get back to her. And it worked a lot better for some people than others. It worked really well for me. I really liked the game. A lot of people didn't. Felt like it was sort of it cheapened the experience of Life is Strange 1 because they didn't feel like it was justified to return to Max. And that's that's not what I felt. That's not how I kind of experience the game, but you do have to kind of tread that line carefully when you're returning to a beloved character, especially after so long, because like I was, I would have been in my 30s when I played Life is Strange, so I wasn't, super impressionable. But if I had been 21 and I had played Life is Strange and then all of a sudden I was 31, I could look back on like playing Life is Strange in the way that it might have been very formative for me in like a very impressionable time in my life. And then I'd have really high stakes for them having to nail exactly what I felt like Life is Strange and Max Caulfield had to be. And so there's risk in not being able to pull that off for people.
Cool. Well, that was awesome. I mean, that was a good conversation. I think that, I'm way more curious now to give it a shot and play it. Like I really need to bump it up my list. I'm currently playing through Dynasty Warriors, which is probably a similar game in structure.
Yeah,
and style
it's pretty much the same game. Yeah,
so I can probably chase it down with that and kind of get the same vibes. But yeah, that's cool. Well, we did the episode. We answered the question. That's kind of it. Would you like to plug anything or share anything before we kind of wrap this episode? Anything else you want to kind of say to put a bow on it? Or let me know. Yeah,
I mean, you can find me online. I'm on Blue Sky at aidanis.fun. Aidan is fun. You can also find my newsletter at astrolabe.aidanmoher.com. It's a irregular newsletter where I write about video games, retro gaming, writing, books, all sorts of stuff. Anything that I'm sort of interested in finds its way there. And it's also the best place to get updates about whatever else I'm working on when I'm putting out new features, when I'm, ready to announce my next book in a few weeks. That's often the best place to find it.
Cool. In a few weeks, potentially. Okay. So I'll keep paying attention.
Coming up.
I'll refresh.
Coming up. Hopefully.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll definitely have you on in a future episode, Aidan. I appreciate you joining the show. You have a good one.
Thanks, you too.